Of course, the reason why the King Cobra is so venomous is down to its prey, but this animal doesn't specialise in, doesn't hunt warm-blooded animals. It feeds purely and only on other snakes, such as pythons, rat snakes, and even some of the most venomous in Asia, like the common krait, the Russell's viper, the saw-scaled viper, and other cobras. Of course, the fangs of a king cobra are long, thin needles that point downwards like this and are fixed. They're not hinged like the fangs of a viper. They can't be moved, so the cobra can only strike going downwards. And of course, what it does is it needs to inject enormous amounts of very, very toxic venom, even deep into the muscle, and that will paralyse and kill its prey like another snake in probably less than a minute. And then it will swallow its prey whole, and believe it or not, this snake even has some degree of immunity to the bites of other snakes. But it can also spread its ribs into a hood to make itself look bigger and more aggressive, and it gives a hiss that's really more like a roar from a snake. But even though this is a snake with incredible capabilities, I mean, all it wants to do is escape from danger, so if it's around people, its first instinct is to flee to get away. And of course, if it realises that it hasn't got anywhere else to go, it will put on a big display to make itself seem larger and more threatening, like spread its ribs into a hood, give its growling roar of a hiss. And then it will only strike if it feels like there's no other choice. And of course, there are people in Asia that do the practice of snake charming, as you can see here, and that's quite often where you catch the cobra's eye by creating movements with your knee or something like that, and then you can just put your finger on the head of the cobra. And of course, because it can only strike going downwards, coming down on top of its head like that makes it physically impossible for the snake to bite its handler. But even so, that's serious confidence and not for the faint-hearted. And another thing about the King Cobra is that a lot of people don't share the passion for snakes, and quite often if they see them, they'll just take a machete to them and kill them, which is an absolutely stupid idea because that's when you're more likely to get bitten. And here is the range of the King Cobra. Now, the next animal I'm going to show you, our next reptile, is another crocodilian, and it's one of the strangest on earth. It is the Gharial. Now, Gharial are in the crocodilian family, so the same family as alligators, crocodiles, and caiman. And they are very, very unusual, but of course a big male can grow to be 6 meters long. But the weirdest thing about them is their snouts. They have a very long, thin and narrow snout. And of course it's very, very thin and the skull is lighter. And they have different muscles in their legs that make them a lot faster through the water than other crocodiles. And the reason why their snout is so thin is because they need to carve through the water really quickly through shoals of fish, or even to grab crustaceans like crayfish or amphibians or lizards, because these are fish specialists. And of course, this bulbous growth here is found on the mature male individuals. In Indian it's called a gora, which means pub. That's used to create a humming noise to attract females. Unfortunately, Gharial are probably the most threatened crocodilians in the world. There's probably no fewer than 2,000 breeding pairs left in the wild. Fewer than even the tigers. Hunting out of fear, and as well as for their hide, and pollution and overfishing of the rivers where they live are thought to be the causes. It's actually a terrifying thought to think that an animal that's been around on the planet since before the dinosaurs could be coming to the brink of extinction because of us. But there are people working to protect them, like with breeding populations in captivity and preserving the rivers where they live and stopping overfishing. And here is their range. Now, the next reptile is the longest snake. It is the reticulated python. Now, the reticulated python is the longest snake in the world, because while the anacondas of South America can get larger and heavier bodied, in terms of pure length, the reticulated python has it all. Of course, the name reticulated comes from the diamond patterning down its back, which is its camouflage, and reticulated means netted. And of course, the largest recorded reticulated python was about 28 feet, so that would be me plus a little bit more. And as you can see here, Steve Batchel has actually handled reticulated pythons before. In fact, before he handled this reticulated python in Deadly 60, he once had to relocate a reticulated python from a nearby village because the python was eating the village's chickens, and they were quite worried it would eat their children. But of course, reticulated pythons mainly feed on small mammals like rodents, but also wild pigs, boars, birds, and even things as big as deer. And of course, reticulated python's probably most famous from Harry Potter, because as you can see here, that is Voldemort's snake, Nagini. Now, when Fantastic Beasts came out, Nagini was shown to have once been a woman. She was Maledictus, which is a witch with a blood curse, where she would eventually be forced to permanently change into a beast. And she of course became a snake permanently, and then she had part of Voldemort's soul inside her. But of course, I've seen reticulated pythons, and they are enormous. But of course, they wouldn't be able to swallow me. In fact, I'd probably be too big for a reticulated python to swallow. But what it would do is just choke the life out of me. Of course, that's how the reticulated python kills its prey. It wraps coils of the body around the animal, and as it breathes out, the snake will just clench a little bit more, and every time the animal breathes out, the snake clenches more and more and more and more, until there's eventually no lung space left and the animal suffocates. But they will not eat a fully grown man, I'm absolutely certain of that. And here is their range. Now, I'm going to finish off with Africa. Now, Africa is legendary for its wildlife, but of course it has its fair share of reptiles. And the first one I'm going to show you is the Black Mamba. Now, the Black Mamba is the largest venomous snake in Africa, and also the most feared. In fact, the name Black Mamba looks like a bit of a misinterpretation, because it's not really black. But the name comes from the black interior of the mouth. Now, this is also the fastest snake in the world, because it can slither as fast as a human can run. And there is a reason for this being such a feared snake, because the Black Mamba's venom is a neurotoxin, which is a toxin that affects the nervous system, the heart, the lungs, and the respiratory system. And if it bites you, it can quite easy that within 2 hours it could thicken the blood in your veins, it could stop your heart beating, stop your lungs, stop your breathing. Of course, that only happens in defence, but The Black Mamba mainly uses its venom on its prey, like rodents, small mammals, birds, lizards and frogs. And unlike many other snakes, it actively chases after prey. And of course, this is the range of the Black Mamba. Now, the next reptile I'm going to show you is the largest in Africa. It is the Nile Crocodile. Now, Nile crocodiles are the largest reptiles in Africa. In fact, a fully grown male can grow to be 6 meters long and weigh a quarter of a ton. And of course, they can live to be about 50 years old or even longer. In fact, I think the oldest living crocodile is kept in captivity, and his name is Henry, because he was originally a man-eating crocodile who was captured by an elephant hunter, Sir Henry, which gave him his name, and he's well over 100 years old, which is absolutely incredible. And of course, the name crocodile in Africa means lizard of the Nile, and they are the closest thing we have in the modern day to a dinosaur. And of course, they've been around since long before the dinosaurs, virtually unchanged. And one reason for that is because they are the ultimate killing machines. And of course, also crocodiles, like all crocodilians, they have special senses along their jaws that pick up vibrations in the water of either animals drinking at the water's edge or struggling in the water. And of course, they can also bite with a force of over 2 tons of pressure. And especially crocodiles in East Africa along the Mara River, what they're waiting for is an annual event, which is the wildebeest migration, because at that time of year, herds of wildebeest are on their never-ending quest for fresh pastures. And so the crocodiles will have waited a year for that event, and that is the best feeding opportunity they'll get all year, either when the wildebeest are crossing the river or they come down to drink. The crocs will hunt them by one thing they do is they get very, very close to them before they sink underwater, and a crocodile can stay underwater for well over 2 hours, and they do that by rationing the oxygen in their blood and slowing their heartbeat down to as little as 3 beats a minute. And of course, a massive male crocodile that could weigh a quarter of a ton could hide itself in 30 centimeters of water. And of course, once the crocodile knows it's time to strike, with a powerful flick of their muscular tail, they will leap out the water. Of course, they shut their eyes to protect them, and once they've got a hold of their prey, they will drag it back into the water, and they will either roll it over until it drowns, or they will just pull it down and drown it. And right here is actually where crocodiles show a sociable side, because crocodiles can't bite off mouthfuls or chew their food, but also their teeth are evolved as grippers, not carvers, so rather than fend off the other crocs, they are welcomed to the feast, because they're unable to dine alone. So what the crocodiles will do is they'll take turns to hold down the carcass, then one will clamp down with his massive jaws, lock his back and neck muscles, and roll, using his bulk to tear out chunks of meat. And in fact, one crocodile can actually consume half a ton of meat in one go. And of course, they don't just eat the meat, they also eat the hide, bone, horn and hoof. Nothing is wasted. And of course, if you're probably wondering what happens to all that bone and hoof, well, crocodiles have probably the strongest stomach acid of any animal, so for them it's no problem at all. And after a big meal like that, the crocodile won't have to eat again for a year. Another thing that always amazes me about